I am Wallace, and I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here tonight. Chuck's going to have to pay back, though. He asked me probably 6 or 8 weeks ago, would I share tonight? And I said, yes, of course, I always do. And fully intend to for so long as I live and I'm able to get there and open my big mouth. November is Gratitude Month, and I'm truly one of those that's extremely grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous, because there's no way that I would be here tonight except through the grace of God and because the program of Alcoholics Anonymous works in my life, and I work the program. It's home group members here, and it's not always easy to talk in front of your home group, but it's a lot of people here I have never seen before. And when I look around this room here, I truly miss those old timers that used to be here. And if I call the names, a lot of you probably would not know them. You probably haven't heard of them. But it's many, many folks that was integral part of this group for years and years, and they are going on to the big meeting in the sky. And I'm in no hurry to get there myself. I don't want to get on that bus just yet. My sobriety date is February 16th, 1964. And I turned 80 years old August 4th. Now, I know I don't look it, but I am. About 2 years ago, I was standing out next to the dumpster up at my home group, and several of the girls were there from the halfway house, and several others, and they were talking about age. And somebody says, well, how old are you? And at that time, I was 78. And I said, well, I am 78, but I said, I know I don't look it. The little gal from the halfway house spoke up and said, said, her head looks like it's wore out 2 bodies. So I watch how I say that now. But it is good to be here. I'm truly grateful every morning that I wake up. I don't come to anymore. I wake up in the morning. And I'm truly grateful for any opportunity I have to start another day. I'm way overdue. I'm undeserving of all the good blessings that have come my way. And I'm truly grateful for them. And I know there's a lot of people here tonight that don't have very, very much time in the program. But I'm truly grateful to see you here, because it's the newcomers that are coming into AA that's going to get into the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. You're going to associate with the older members. You're going to get involved in service work, and you're going to learn to apply the principles and teachings of the program. So therefore, you will become the leadership of AA in the future. And unless we have new people continuing to come in on a regular basis, AA would die. And I certainly don't want it to die. I want it to be here for those who are coming on now, and there's a lot of people out there qualifying for this program today and tonight. I guarantee that. The big book tells me exactly what I'm supposed to do, sharing a general way of what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. And that's what I'm going to try to do. Now, I'm not going to take step 5 up here tonight. I've done that with my first sponsor, and I'm not going into a lot of things. I hear some people share some things from behind the podium that should be shared one-on-one with the sponsor, and then you ought to shoot him then. But I'm not going into gory details about my life tonight. I'm not going to take step 5. There's a lot of things happen in my life ain't none of your business. And you're not going to hear them from me. But I will share in a general way what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. Chuck knows I'm a low-bottom drunk. He heard me talk before, and he said he wanted me to come. Said some people down here had never seen one. So here I am. I'm not originally from Sanford, but I do live in Sanford. I've lived there since 1970. I was born and raised in Roxborough, North Carolina, and straight up 501. And I can tell you, 501 is the best thing ever come out of Roxborough. Absolutely. It comes 8/10 of a mile from my house now. I can't get away from it seems. But I was born and raised up there, born into a cotton mill village back in 1933. And Mom and Dad had lost their home as a result of the Depression, and it was very difficult on them in those days. It was 6 boys and 6 girls in the family. When they found out what was causing it, they quit. And I'm the baby boy. I have one sister remaining, and she lives down in Clover, South Carolina. About 2 years ago, my wife and I went to Clover to visit her, and she had sold her home next door to me in Sanford. She had gone down to Charlotte to some kind of revival meeting or something, and anyway, she was 70 years old at the time, and she met a preacher that was 76. And they said they fell in love, and I believe it because they're too old to come in heat. Anyway, they got married, and she moved down to Clover. And my wife and I were sitting in there when we were having a nice meal with them that she and her husband had prepared. And she was sitting across the table from me. And she says, Wallace says, how do you like the new home that we have here in this gated community? And I said, well, sis, it's nice. But I said, you need to remember that I used to live in the biggest house in Raleigh. And it was definitely a gated community. She started kicking me on my leg for me to shut up. And I know her husband had some questions to ask her after I left. But he didn't ask me. But they are doing just fine, and that's all right with me. I know that I've been an alcoholic since I was about 20 years old. I know that as a kid, I had a lot of bad feelings about myself. I was tall and skinny to be a kid, still tall and skinny, although I put on a little weight recently because I had to quit smoking with this heart condition. And I've gained some weight. My britches are getting too little. And I'm having to buy some new ones, and I don't like that. But anyway, I had bad feelings about myself as a kid. I felt inferior, less than. I couldn't participate in some games at school the way that the other boys did. I was real chicken in the football situation. If they threw that ball to me, I could catch it. But if I saw one of those big jokers coming toward me, I'd slip or I'd trip over something. I'd fall down. I didn't want him hitting me. I didn't like that. And but I did get along quite well when I started caddying and learned to play golf, and I could hold my own in golf. Still could up until a couple of years ago. I haven't played since July year before last now, and I miss it. But other things, filling that void in my life now. But I had bad feelings about myself as a kid. I know that resentments were a part of my life at that time. Now, as a kid, I didn't know what resentment meant, didn't know what it was, but I knew that I hated some things. And one of the things I hated was Santa Claus. I hated that joker with that red suit. He didn't treat us right. He'd go down the road to the neighbor's house and he'd bring them toys, bicycles, ball gloves, and ice clothes and so forth. And he'd bring my sisters and I a little 25-cent cap pistol or a little rag doll or something like that. And I really resented that. I couldn't understand why he'd want to treat us that way. And when I found out who Santa Claus was, that resentment or that hatred that I had was transferred toward my parents. And I've known for years and years and years and years that they were doing the best that they could by us as we were growing up, because it was a lot of us there at home. My older brother left home when he was 21 years old. He had been working in the mill. He had dropped out of school, just like several of my other brothers and sisters did. They dropped out of school to help support the family. And he left home when he was 21 years old and did not give that last paycheck to my father. He was accustomed to doing that. But he left home and went to South Carolina with a 7th grade education. Down there he got into, didn't have middle school in those days, but he got into the 7th, 8th, 9th grade and so forth, finished high school. He went to college, and eventually he became a doctor of divinity. Now, I had the same parents that he did, but I certainly did not become a doctor of divinity. I rebelled at the good things in life. I was forced to go to church with Mom and Dad and my other sisters and brothers, and I didn't like it. I never felt in church the way they seemed to feel. And I'm sort of like Dr. Bob. I swore when I got of age that I never darkened the doors of another church as long as I lived. But I did. And today I don't mind that once in a while. Some people say I've got buzzard religion, that I go to church when there's something dead or something to eat. And that's about the only time I go. But I do have a spiritual way of life today as a result of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I slowly came to believe that God in His infinite mercy wanted me to stay sober and make something with my life, and I did that. I made a conscious decision when I was 17 years old that I would begin drinking with guys who were riding around with me, and I began to sip a little beer with them. We'd ride around on weekends and go to ball games and drag races and such as this, and go down to the lake in the summertime, swim a little bit, and they would drink beer. And I couldn't understand why they wanted to drink 2 or 3. And they enticed me to begin drinking a little beer with them. I didn't like the taste of it. I would not drink the way that they did. It made me nauseous. And I never did feel the effect produced by alcohol. I just didn't like it. I knew why Budweiser had all those horses around. I felt like that might be where it was coming from. But I didn't like it. But in '53, I was 19 years old. The Korean War was in progress, and I got drafted, and I was sent down to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I took basic training there, was transferred to Fort Lee, Virginia, and that was in the late summer. And in early November, I went from Fort Lee to Roxborough on a weekend pass. And I went out to a random square dance one Saturday night with a couple of guys who had come by to pick me up. We went out to that dance, and I'm standing at a heater back in the corner, and I'm watching other people have a good time. And I couldn't participate and get involved in situations like that because I felt so inferior, less than, backward in country, and uneducated. And I'd stand back and watch other people have a good time. And that particular Saturday night, there was a lady that came in the door, and she immediately started walking toward that heater, and she came over there and started talking to me. And it made me restless, ill at ease, and discontent, because I had recognized her when she was walking across the floor, even though I'd never seen her before in my life. I'd heard stories about her in the pool rooms and service stations and beer joints that would make your hair curl. And she started talking to me, and my buddies was looking over there. They began giggling and whispering to each other, and other people were looking that way, and I didn't know what was going on. But anyway, I knew from the way she was talking and acting that this was a naughty girl. And Mom and Dad and my preacher brother warned me about naughty girls and drinking white liquor and so forth. And I knew that I shouldn't get involved because they said I'd go to hell. Well, she talked for a few more minutes and then asked me would I escort her out to the car. You know, I thought maybe some wolves in that parking lot. I'm right out of basic training, and I got all these medals on I'd earned that afternoon at the PX. And maybe it's my patriotic duty. And I escorted her out into that well-lit parking lot and got in her car. And that old Chevrolet was a little bit hard to start up. She got it going, she got the radio going. She got the heater going, and then she tried to get me going. And I was restless and ill at ease and discontent. And she saw that I was backward and country and not responding to her wishes, and she reached up on the seat and came out with a pint of white whiskey, reached in that glove compartment, got 2 cups, and she poured out that cup of whiskey. And I'm sitting there, and she's still talking and rubbing up against me and nibbling on my ear. And I'm upset. And I'm not accustomed to situations like that. My experience with women up until that night was about like my being in the Army. I'd fired off a few good rounds, but I'd never been in combat. I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about what Mom and Dad had said, and my preacher brother about I'd go to hell if I got involved in situations like this. And I would think to myself, now I shouldn't do it. And then I think about the possibilities of the evening, about the things I'd heard about her, and I just couldn't quite make up my mind. This tug of war was going on up there. And I looked at her, and she's beautiful, and looked at that whiskey, and I looked at them, and them told me to take a drink. And I sat in that car about 30 to 40 minutes that night. We had 2 or 3 more cups of that white whiskey. Now, I had been in top physical condition when I got out of basic training. I had been in top physical condition and working on that farm with my daddy. But never, ever, ever had I felt the way that I slowly evolved into a creature I had never been. Rather than being backward and country and skinny and ugly with crooked teeth and straight hair, I became dark, tall, handsome, very articulate, very knowledgeable. Went from 6'2", 140, to 6'8", 268, and I knew everything was going to be all right. And it absolutely was. It absolutely was. I'm not going to tell you everything. But I lay in bed on Sunday morning about 2:30, and I'm fighting off sleep. I didn't want to sleep ever again in my life. I just wanted to lay there and relive Saturday night over and over and over, thinking about every marvelous thing. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Sunday morning I had found the solution to my problem, a magic ingredient that enabled me to be normal. I had laughed, talked, danced that night. I had socialized. I'd had a good time. I had engaged in activities that I had felt was morally wrong according to my family. And I had enjoyed it. And I knew I wanted to do everything again. And I knew that the next week, when I went on pass, I would be buying my first pint of whiskey. And I did just that. And that's the way I began drinking, looking forward to the weekends, having that opportunity to feel the effects produced by alcohol. I thoroughly enjoyed it, the way that it changed me. And I had lots of good times in my social drinking period for the next 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks. 6 weeks later, I came to on a Monday morning in jail. It was the first time I'd been to jail. I had been called for drunken driving Sunday afternoon. I had not remembered it. And that drunken driving episodes took place for the next 10 years. Off and on. I lost license from North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. And those driving charges, there's about 14 of them, driving under the influence without the license revoked, they became very minor obstacles in my life, very minor compared to some things later on. And I can tell you that I'm one of those guys that when I put booze into my system, I became totally unpredictable. I didn't know where I would go, what I would do, who I'd get with, what the situation would turn out to be. I knew one thing for sure. I'd either get fighting liquor, stealing liquor, crying liquor, puking liquor, sleeping liquor, arguing liquor, fighting. Something was going to happen. And time after time I went to jail as a result of running my mouth. And when you've got a hummingbird rear end and an alligator mouth, you can get in an awful lot of trouble. And I did. And I did okay so far as the military was concerned for the first 2 years. Got an honorable discharge. Got out and went back home, and 18 months later I went back into service because of problems I was having around home. And when I went back in, I was running from responsibility, running from life, running to get away from driving charges, running because I didn't have a job, running because I had money owed to my family. My money had been spent on bail bondsmen, court costs, fines, and such as this, and I didn't have anything. I went back in service not because I was patriotic. I went back in service running from all those problems. But my girlfriend had told me that we should get married, and I told her that I was in no condition to get married. And she said, condition I'm in, we better. And in addition to being allergic to alcohol, I'm allergic to shotguns. And I went back on active duty. And about 3 or 4 months later, en route to Korea, I stood at the rail of that ship one morning, and I got to thinking about all the trouble I had been having as a result of my drinking. And I made up my mind that when I get to Korea, I won't drink. And the first 5.5 months over there, I really soldiered. I really worked hard. I was the sharpest soldier in the company. I made Company Soldier of the Month 5 consecutive times, Battalion Soldier of the Month 3. I'm at the promotion board. I had gone back in with the rank of corporal through the National Guard, but I had taken an early discharge and re-upped for 6 years. Anyway, I went before the promotion board and was promoted from corporal to sergeant. That same Saturday afternoon that I had those sergeant stripes sewed on, I went down to the NCO club to buy my friends some drinks. It was customary. I began drinking in that club that afternoon with those guys, even though I had not drunk anything for 5.5 months. And I don't recall getting back to the barracks that night. I know that they threw me out of the club through the screen door because I was drunk and disorderly. And that weekend was just a blackout. And Monday morning I began drinking on duty. And of course in less than 90 days, those sergeant stripes were gone. I got back to the States in '58, went home to see my parents. Wife number one was there. She had the little girl with her that had been born while I was in Korea. And Mom and Dad said they'd furnish a 5-room apartment for us if I'd come home on weekends to be a husband and a father. They loved the little girl. I tried that, but I could not live up to their expectations. That was in October that they had furnished that apartment, and I walked out of it in January. Walked down to the highway and was hitchhiking back to Fort Lee, Virginia. And in Fort Lee, Virginia, my alcoholic problems continued to mount up. Coming in drunk into the barracks at night, falling over foot locker, slamming wall locker doors, going into the mess hall, vomiting in the kitchen, and they didn't like that. I got a Virginia driver's license, another old automobile, and began to drive in Virginia. I was caught in Richmond for drunken driving and hit and run, and then in Colonial Heights caught on 7 more driving charges. And all those charges were consolidated for the purpose of sentencing, and the prosecuting attorney told the company commander that in the event I was found guilty of those things, that I would be pulling some time. And the company commander was already tired of the situation I was in. He had already sent me to a chaplain for counseling. He had already sent me to a psychiatrist for counseling, and that didn't do any good. But anyway, he then took my record and put it before a board of 12 officers. And every one of those officers declared that I had become alcoholically unfit for military service. I no longer resembled that guy that had been Soldier of the Month in Korea and Battalion Soldier of the Month. I no longer looked like that at all. But anyway, they did boot me out, and I went to court the next day, and they were right, I did go to jail. Pulled 57 days in city jail in Petersburg out of the 90-day sentence I was sentenced to. Anyway, I ran from one job to another in Virginia, and eventually the heat was getting a little heavy up there, and I went back home to Roxborough. I had not been communicating with Mom and Dad for that year that I had been out. And I went back home, and they told me no drinking. You can stay here and get your life straightened out. And I stayed there. Wife number one was already filing for divorce. And I got a job in the mill, living with Mom and Dad, and they said, you can go with us to church and so forth, but you're not to be running around with anybody that drinks and so forth. Another 5.5 month period of dryness came up, and during that 5.5 months, I did stay at their home. and I spent a lot of time down at his store. And they had introduced me to a lady that was a Baptist Sunday school teacher, and they loved her, and they figured she'd be my salvation. And 5.5 months I was there with Mom and Dad. I got along because I was dry. I wanted to drink every day, but I would not. I was working in the mill and not running around doing nothing with anybody except her and Mom and Dad and one church and working in the mill. And after 5.5 months, she thought she had me saved, and she asked me to marry her. And she had a house, 13 acres of land, nice car, good job. And I had 2 pair of pants and 2 shirts, and that ain't no bad deal. And we got married. 3 weeks later, we went to a dance. Wife number 2 now, she was Baptist, but she loved to dance. And most Baptists around home did not dance. It was a sin. You know, a woman smoke a cigarette or put on a bathing suit, she's going to get a double dose of hellfire and damnation. And Sue loved to dance. But those people up there, they wouldn't even have sex standing up. They was afraid somebody would think they was dancing. But anyway, we went to the dance that night, and Sue went to the powder room with one of her friends, and that lady's husband worked in the mill with me, and he handed me a glass of Old Granddad. And I tell you, I poured that Jesse down, and when my wife got ready, she came back out, I did dance for a couple of numbers with her. But when the dance was over, I had passed out at the back of the room at a table. And she went out the room crying that night. After the dance was over, and I went out behind her, and I was cursing and vomiting, and I put her through a lot of hell for the next year. And many, many times during the summer of '62, I tried to quit drinking, and I couldn't. And I'd always go right back to it. Sometime I'd be a day, sometime a few hours, but I'd go back. I absolutely could not find a solution to quitting and staying quit. Well, I quit many times, but I start back in 2 or 3, 4 hours, 6 hours. That's just the way it was. I could not stop. And after Christmas of 1962, I worked a little bit for the first 3 weeks. I worked enough to get money to buy my booze with. My money during the past year had been spent on child support for my daughter by my first wife, and the rest of it had been spent on booze. My wife had, number 2, she'd been totally responsible for the upkeep of the house and car payments and everything else. My money was spent on booze and child support. Very little did I help her during that first year. And many, many times she warned me about my drinking. But after Christmas in 1962, the 3rd weekend, I got off work on Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. I went up to the service station in a beer joint, and I got drunk. Don't recall getting home Friday night. Don't recall getting home Saturday night or Sunday night. But Monday morning, my wife was shaking me vigorously when I came to. And she asked me, was I going to work? And I said, yes. She was in the kitchen, had been in the kitchen preparing eggs and bacon and biscuits. And when I turned to the right to get off the bed that morning, my elbow hit something on the pillow, and it was hard and made a clanging noise. And I raised it up. There's 2 pints of white whiskey on that pillow. I sat down on the side of that bed that morning and started drinking. And she came in the room a few minutes later and saw what was going on. And then she walked up in front of me and began to say some things with more authority than she had used all the year prior to that. And basically what she was telling me was I was a sorry, no good, low down drunk. No good to her, no good to anyone else. No good to my daughter. And that when she got home from work that afternoon, she wanted me out of her house and out of her heart and out of her life forever. She went on to work that morning. I don't recall leaving the house that morning. What I'm having to tell you now is what I read about in papers or I heard at a court session later on, or family members told me what they had heard. But I'm confident that I did go to town that Monday, and from what I was told, that the beer joints in Roxborough on Court Street would not serve me beer that afternoon because I was already drunk. And I heard a sheriff testify at a trial that he had looked out his window that Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock and he saw me on the street drunk. And he was going to come out and arrest me, but the phone rang in his office and his secretary was not working that day. He walked across the room and answered the phone, talked on it for about a minute and came back to the window to see where I was. And he said he didn't see me. And he figured the police had me or would have me within a few minutes. And he forgot about it because it was extremely cold. And sometime within the next couple hours after that is when offenses were committed that brought about my arrest again the next morning. And I was placed in jail and no bond was allowed. 3 weeks later, I stood in Superior Court. I had been unable to defend myself because of having been on a blackout for that weekend and that Monday. And the sheriff presented the evidence, the judge listened, and then he told me to stand. And then he says, young man, for the offenses committed, I hereby sentence you to the North Carolina Department of Correction for a period of 40 years and natural life at the expiration. Said, take him out of here, sheriff. And it was 2 days later, I was escorted into Central Prison. And they took the handcuffs and shackles off of me that Wednesday afternoon. A few days later, I stood before the associate warden for a classification meeting. And the associate warden looked at those commitment papers. 40 years plus natural life at the expiration. And he says, young man, if you have any hope of ever getting outside of this institution again, you're going to have to be a good boy. And I knew I was going to be a good boy. I didn't like that place. I was given an excellent job as a clerk in the classification section, the record section. 3 weeks after I went to work in that section, the other inmates took me into their confidence and told me how that some things was being smuggled in by free people who wanted to make additional money. They told me how that bottles of alcohol was being smuggled out of the hospital. Told me how I could get those if I had a little money. And I began getting that stuff, and I began using it. I got fired from my job in June of '63, but you bet your butt they didn't send me home. They gave me another job. I got fired because of my attitude. I had become more knowledgeable about the job than the supervisor who had been there 30 years. I was having trouble with the other inmates. I was getting locked up while I was locked up. I owed money on the yard, and my alcoholism continued behind the walls of Central Prison. In June of that year, I went to a meeting called Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know why I went to that meeting. Whether it was to get out of the cell block where it was about 105 degrees, whether it was to see free people, to get coffee or what, but I went. And I sat at the back of the room. I didn't participate in any way. And also in June of that year, a guy was in my wife's home when she got home from work, on a Monday morning, and she was assaulted and robbed and kidnapped. And I never will forget that. About 10 days later, I found out about it. And I went to the doctor and told him my nerves was messed up, that I needed something for my nerves due to the situation. And he gave me some pills, and I used that excuse whereby that I could have that slip of paper in my pocket. Guards could not lock me up because I was under a doctor's order to be taking those narcotics. And I used that for as long as I could. In September of that year, I was faced out on the yard by the officers who took me to the back hall and locked me up on death row. And I didn't know why I was being locked up. But they told me when I got downstairs that they had brought the guy in that had been tried for the charges that he committed against my wife. And they sort of felt like I might want to talk with him. And they didn't want me talking with him. So they locked me on death row while he was being processed. And it was about 40 days later that they let me off of death row because that guy was on the bus. He had been processed and he was being sent to Odom, Caledonia prison farm down in the eastern part of the state. And they let me out. And I had made up my mind during that 40 days a night that I was locked up down there, that never ever again will I get involved in anything out on that yard again. I'm going to get myself straight. Within 2 hours after they released me on Saturday morning, I was on the influence again. That went on for the next several months. And on February 16, 1964, I came to in my cell block upstairs, 4th floor up one night. Took a look at where I was in life. I had been thinking of suicide, and I knew that I would never ever get out of the walls of Central Prison the way I was conducting myself. I had nothing to look forward to. And I made up my mind that tonight I'm going over that railing, 40 feet below to the concrete in my wretched existence. And I stood at that door after taking everything I had on the pill and drinking that last bottle of alcohol. And I waited for that door to slide open, as it would at 9 o'clock every night. You call it passing out, blacking out, sickness, whatever you choose to call it. But I choose to believe that a loving God in His infinite mercy gave this alcoholic one last chance. I came to that night well past 9 o'clock, I'm sure. And there was a roll of vomit from that door 6 foot back to the commode. And I'm on my knees in front of that commode. And I'm choking and crying and praying and vomiting. And I pass out. And sometime later I came to and I crawled into my bed, but I didn't sleep a wink all night. That morning when the guard came around to be sure that everybody was out of his cell block, to go out on the yard, to go to breakfast, and to go to their respective jobs, when I went out the door that morning, the inmates on the right-hand side and on the left confronted me and said, "What was going on in there last night?" I said, "What are you talking about?" They said, "Last night you cried out loud enough for everybody to hear you on this floor. You said, 'God, if you help me get back to AA, I'll try.'" I no more remember praying that prayer or saying those words than you do. But I tell you this, it's a foreign Thursday night at the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I went to that meeting, I didn't sit down in the back of the room. I came up to the left side of the podium, and that became my seat. When I went back to the cell block that night, I took some little pamphlets with me to begin reading about Alcoholics Anonymous. And 2 weeks later, a guy that most all of you know, Tom I, gave me a copy of the big book and told me what I needed to do with it. And I took that book back to my cell, and I began to read about alcoholism. And I discovered that I had been an alcoholic since I was about 20 years old. And I can tell you that was a real promotion for me. It was the first promotion I'd had in a long, long time. But that was a real promotion for me. I was relieved to know that there was something wrong with me that could be treated by what those people in Alcoholics Anonymous had said. And I began to read that book, and I began to get active in the group. And I've never met an inmate that was as active in AA as I became when I was behind the walls of Central Prison. And during the entire 18 years, 1 month, 26 days, and 2 hours that I was in there. The program of recovery I have today, the program of recovery I brought out into the community with me, is the same program of recovery that I found behind the walls of Central Prison. You see, the power of Alcoholics Anonymous and the power of God can penetrate walls that no one else can penetrate. I know that beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'm alcoholic, that I have been since I was about 20 years old, and I do know that no human power could ever relieve me of my alcoholism. And I discovered behind the walls of Central Prison that God could and would if he was sought. And I began to seek that God, and I found that God, and I found a way of life that enabled me to stay out of trouble and to become happy, joyous, and free. I was freer behind the walls of Central Prison than I had been out in the community. Out in the community, I was always caught up in the bondage of alcoholism, being unable to determine where I went, who I got with, and what I would do, because alcohol completely dominated my life, my thinking, and those around me were harmed tremendously. I know that as a result of a male member of Al-Anon in Sanford, as a result of him contacting the governor, and as a result of him getting over 500 letters written to the parole board and to Governor Hunt, as a result of his actions, the governor believed him and the people in Sanford. And Governor Hunt commuted all that time down to 35 years, whereby I would be paroled. And I went to work eventually, on work release when I was transferred to Sanford. Went to work with the phone company and worked with them for 20 years and retired in 1993 from the phone company. I took an early retirement from the phone company because the Department of Correction wanted me to go to work with them for 2 years as a counselor in the alcoholism drug program. And I did that for 2 years. But I would not sign a contract for more than 2 years. I found out I didn't like working for the Department of Correction much better than I like being an inmate. And I don't do anything today. Sometimes I wait at 12 o'clock to start doing that. But I am active in service work. I have been active in service work since I got into AA in 1964. I go into Morrison Prison Group every Wednesday night. I was going into Central Prison, but I was just involved in too many things. I don't go there. At the present time, I'm taking a leave of absence from that. But I'm doing what I can to carry the message behind the walls. I go into a lot of other prison units to share. And I've had all sorts of service positions. And I've been very, very privileged that I've been into more than 28 states in this nation and into numerous prisons in California and Montana and Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Colorado, carrying a message where I'm invited. I do it because it was done unto me. I have a way of life that has been absolutely remarkable. Divorced wife number 2 while I was at the Sanford Advancement Center because she was jealous of Alcoholics Anonymous. She said that AA was a cult, it was of the devil, and that it looked like I'd be getting out in a few years, and that when I got out, I don't have to be going with her to church and forget about that AA junk. And I said, well, Sue, I wrote her a letter the following week. If you think AA is of the devil, you go to the devil. I divorced her. But I married again later. I'm on wife number 3 now, and I've had her for 35 years this past May 26th. Kissed her tonight when I left home. And she'll be there when I get back. Got a nice little home up there. It's been paid for years and years and years. Got a car that's still running, and I've got respectability. I know that it's only through the grace of God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and people like you that brought the message into me. And it enabled me to do something about a wretched life, a life that was torn asunder as a result of my inability to manage my life because of my obsession for drink. God removed that obsession when I was behind the walls of Central Prison. I have not had a desire or a compulsion to drink since 1966, 2 years after I got in AA. I'm grateful for that. I'm still a free man tonight, and I'm grateful for that. And thank you for having me here.